Well, welcome into Bayou Roar. On this episode, we are going to be discussing LSU's upcoming game against South Carolina, as well as predicting the other big Week 7 matchups. And so we are going to have a lot of fun diving into that. But first, I wanted to talk about some different pieces of news that dropped on the LSU side of things. LSU has agreed to a deal for patches that are going to be placed on the jerseys. And look, it doesn't matter who it is, really, in my mind. This was kind of more of an inevitable thing. There's a lot of people really upset about this news coming out. And look, you can be mad about it if you want. I understand, like for so long, right? We've had just great uniforms in college football that are now going to all have these things eventually, right? I mean, we've seen fields all across the country start to adopt field sponsors. I mean, LSU's done it this year, Alabama's done it, and now you're going to start seeing an infiltration on the uniforms. But here's the thing, with the world that we live in college football, where you are trying to get as much money as you can, to spend as much money as you can to bring people into the program to try to help you win a national championship, this is just part of the deal. And look, yes, is it sad that we're losing a lot of things like LSU's classic uniforms are going to start having advertisements on them? Does that stink? Absolutely. But is this the next step of the NIL evolution that we're going to have to see? It absolutely is. Because, again, if you want to keep up, if you want to continue to bring in guys that are going to help your team, this is what you've got to do. And so for LSU, this is just the next step. Now, I don't think they are going to actually start rolling this out like in games this season. From what I kind of understand, I think this is supposed to be something that it will be taking place starting next year. So, like maybe sometime in the spring, so maybe we'll see baseball wearing patches on their jerseys. But in terms of football, we won't see it until next fall. Now, in practice, they are already having jerseys with patches on it. I've seen some photos of that on Twitter. But as for actual game days, I still think that is a little bit off in the future. But for now, that is something crazy that is happening, as well as the the NCAA Division One Administrative Committee has also passed the dates for the one-time only college football transfer portal. So now we know that the 2025 college football transfer portal will last from January the 2nd to January the 16th, according to the NCAA. And again, this is a change that I am quite excited about because I always felt it was just too chaotic having a portal that happened sometime in December. So you're potentially losing guys for bowl games if you didn't make the college football playoff. You also are trying to get high school recruits while you're also actively trying to recruit your roster. It was just a lot going on for no reason at all. And then the same with the spring portal window. It's like, how do you expect to actually have a really solid spring for a football program if you potentially are going to lose half the guys that you're rolling out there, to practice with? It just never made a whole lot of sense. So this is going to make things so much better because now you're going to have such a better idea of where your roster is going to stand come spring. And that's going to help you take even bigger leaps and add more competition into spring to help set you up better for the fall. I'm all on board with the single transfer portal window, and I'm glad that we know that it's from January the 6th, or sorry, January the 2nd to January the 16th. So about a 2 week window there. I love that a lot. But we'll move on from the news portion of this now and head into this matchup with South Carolina. Now, look, this game at the beginning of the year, I think a lot of people circled on their calendars because, I mean, you're talking about a team, from South Carolina that last year shocked a lot of people by how they were just kind of able to turn around. Lenora Sellers was incredible, a breakout star last year. A South Carolina defense that featured a lot of really big time talent, especially on the defensive line. I mean, last year's South Carolina team was really, really good. And then, of course, everybody was hyped up for LSU this season, Garrett Nussmeier returning, a revamped defense through the transfer portal. I mean, just so many things that a lot of people at the beginning of the year thought, man, by the time this South Carolina and LSU game, comes about in October, both of those teams may be in the top 10 and both of those teams may be undefeated. But then, of course, things did not go to plan for at least the South Carolina side of things for sure, because, you beat Virginia Tech in your opener. They beat South Carolina State as they should. But then Lenore Sellers gets a concussion. He's out for the entire Vanderbilt game, basically, and they lose 31-7. And then you go take on Missouri and you lose that game. And then you rebounded and you beat Kentucky, but Kentucky is probably the worst team in the SEC right now. So does that really say a whole lot? I mean, they won 35-13. Sure, that's really impressive. But again, does it really hold much merit? And then, of course, you go on bye, the same as LSU, and now both teams coming off a bye week, heading into this matchup in Death Valley on Saturday night with a lot to play for, because LSU is still in the top 15, ranked currently at number 11, sitting right outside of the top 10. And look, for LSU, yes, you are coming off a very disappointing loss against Ole Miss right before your bye week. But there's still a lot of things I think that you can be encouraged by. I talked about this on our last episode, but I mean, you only lost to Ole Miss by 5 in a game where your offense was absolutely horrible and your defense was pretty much worn out after playing like 90 snaps. Like, I mean, it was just a recipe for disaster, and yet you still only lost by 5 on the road against a Lane Kiffin-led offense. Like, honestly, there's a lot of things that, yes, you are disappointed in because you should not have lost that game, but you're encouraged by the fact that you can turn this around real fast, and all of your goals for the season, making the college football playoff, competing for a national championship, that is still very much ahead of you. But it starts with this game against South Carolina on Saturday night. This is the game where you have to get back and get right again. Just like Alabama, lost to Florida State at the beginning of the year. That was a horrible loss for them. They should not have lost that game. They rebounded. They started to improve. They've gotten better. They've beaten Georgia now. They've beaten Vanderbilt now, two pretty solid teams in the SEC this year, and they seem to be back to form. So for LSU, this is your game to get back to form. And honestly, it all depends on this offense. And so we're going to dive into these offensive keys first, because for this offense, I mean, this is the game where you have to prove that you can turn it around. Because I hate to say it, but as you move forward, the defenses you're going to face are going to get better and better. I mean, it's just the case. And if you can't go up against this South Carolina defense, which is struggling immensely, I mean, I don't know how you're going to rebound any other way. So, and that is the first thing, is this South Carolina defense, rushing wise, is another rushing defense that is really, really bad. And it's giving some PTSD from Ole Miss because, everybody talked about that as well. Ole Miss's defense being last in the SEC in rushing defense. And South Carolina is not too much farther up the board from them. And so this is another game where if you're going to win it, you have to establish some kind of a rushing offense. Now, again, does that mean you go out there and run for 200 yards? No, because I don't think that's very feasible given what we've seen so far. But is this a game where maybe you can get 90 from Caden Durham and maybe 30 from Jawan Johnson, or maybe 25 from Harlem Berry, possibly, and you can piece together a good performance from that? I mean, there's a possibility where that happens. And that is the big thing, is that you do have Caden Durham back for this game probably at nearly 100%, which will be a huge boost to your running back room. But at the same time, you couldn't scheme up anything against Ole Miss until kind of a little bit later in the game. Harlem Berry kind of got going a little bit, but a little too late by that point, right? And so, again, if you're going to have any kind of success at all in this game, you've got to take advantage of what their weak point is on defense, and that is their rush defense. And listen, they know what your weak point is on offense. They know it's rushing offense. And so they're going to make you prove that you can run the ball against them. They're going to take notes from that Ole Miss game. They're going to try to put the pressure on LSU to run the ball. And that's what LSU has got to accomplish this week. They've got to get that going. Again, I don't think it's got to be 200 yards, but maybe you get, again, an 85 from Durham or a 40 spot from Jawan Johnson and a couple other players combined for 115, 120. If LSU can get over 100 rushing yards in this game, you're going to have a much better shot than the 52 yards or whatever that you put up against Ole Miss. So rushing offense is, again, the premium. And I know that's what we've basically been saying all year long. But again, it's the truth. If you cannot get any kind of a rushing offense going, what do you think is going to happen to your passing game? It's going to get a lot harder to throw the ball because they're going to just drop back 8. And so this is a team where you have got to get back on stride with your rushing offense. And again, having Caden Durham back will help immensely, but it doesn't solve everything. You have got to show out of this bye week that you have figured some things out on how you can get some form of a rushing offense. Now, the next thing is this defense as a whole is not quite as talented as the South Carolina defense from last year, but especially on the defensive line, they lost a lot of heavy hitters. They did. But this defensive line is still capable of producing some pressure, and Dylan Stewart is a big-time playmaker on that defensive line. So for this offensive line this week, they have got to be in premier form when going into pass protection. They have got to be able to give Nussmeier time against Dylan Stewart and the boys of South Carolina to be able to have a shot at throwing the ball. And look, that's another thing that we've got to see because it was a big struggle against Ole Miss again. Ole Miss took a different approach. They dropped a lot of people back. So, maybe if you get the rushing game going, it opens up the passing lanes a little bit. But Ole Miss, even when rushing 3, was still able to get pressure at times on Nussmeier. This offensive line has got to play at a much higher level. Hopefully, you've gotten Braylon Moore healthy. Hopefully, you've had time to develop guys like Carius Kern, who actually played really well against Ole Miss, and I wouldn't mind seeing him again play a big role on Saturday night. But hopefully, you've had some time to develop some things now where they're not just going to be walking turnstiles out there when they're going up against this defensive line. Because if you allow Dylan Stewart to make some plays, it's going to be a long night for you offensively, especially if you can't get that run game going. Because here's the thing, I've listened to a lot of people this week, various different things in it. They all kind of agree on the same point. The South Carolina team, roster-wise, is not what they were last year. And really, there's not a whole lot of areas where South Carolina has a significant edge over LSU, at least on paper. But the defensive line is one where you can say that defensive line is probably going to have an advantage over LSU's offensive line. And so that is what you've got to watch out for, is that defensive line being able to create some havoc for you offensively. And so again, you got to give Nussmeier the time that he needs. At least take that excuse off of the table that, well, Nuss was pressured the whole time. He didn't have time to throw a good pass. Like, take that excuse away, step up to bat, get him some time to release the ball. Now, here's the other thing with this offense. Very similar to Ole Miss. What I said back when we played Ole Miss a couple weeks ago was against Lane Kiffin and his offenses, your best strategy is to keep them off the field as much as you can. Because the more opportunities you give them, the more opportunities they have to just march right down the field and score, which puts a lot more pressure on you. It's very similar with South Carolina in just the sense of LaNorris Sellers is a playmaker. We'll talk about this in just a second. This South Carolina offense has not been doing very well this year for the most part, but LaNorris Sellers is an absolute playmaker. And if you keep giving him opportunities to go out there on the field and play ball, he will probably make something incredible happen. It's just more so it's going to be a matter of time rather than if it will happen at all. So you have to limit the amount of times Lenora Sellers goes out onto the field, which means you need to play keep away, getting sustained drives, not going three and out. This is one where I think LSU defensively could have a really good night. So I don't know if I'm necessarily saying you have to go down the field and score points every single drive. Like, I'm not saying you have to go down and get a touchdown every single time. I'm not even saying you have to go down and get a field goal every single time. But the more you keep playing around with these, we're just going to keep going three and out over and over and over again until we finally get one drive of like 7 plays, that ain't going to work. Because again, the more chances you give Lenora Sellers, the more problems you're potentially going to have. Because unlike DJ Lagway, he's not going to probably throw 5 interceptions. He's just not going to do that. He is a much better quarterback than a DJ Lagway was. You cannot play defensive ball with Lenora Sellers on the other side. So, with that being said, this is a game where if you are LSU, you are trying to keep the ball away from their offense as much as possible, even though they are not a great offense this year. But we'll move on from that now because that's just, one of the biggest keys here. Your defense cannot get gassed like they did against Ole Miss. They just can't. And then lastly, their pass defense is a little bit more of a strength for them this year than their rush defense has been. Their rush defense has been kind of, like I said, near the bottom, but pass defense, they've actually been pretty good. But here's the thing. The whole team struggles a lot with tackling. The team struggles with playing consistently well. So honestly, this is a game where I think you need to try to speed them up a little bit, force them to have to do some different stuff that maybe they're not used to, and find some quick game stuff to implement. Keep them on their toes, keep them rattled the whole time. That may just be throwing a lot of quick screens and stuff like that, constantly moving, going up tempo, stuff like that. Brian Kelly mentioned that he wants to go faster on offense than they have so far this season, especially at the beginning of the game, starting faster. Now, again, maybe that's just coach speak, trying to appease all the media that's been, just barking at him, basically all week on how have you fixed the offense. I mean, I've listened to both press conferences he had this week, and basically every question that was asked of him was about offensive stuff and not defensive stuff. Very few questions about the defense because we know what they are. But offensively, we don't know what they are. But again, I like kind of the stuff that you did against Clemson. Things that were a little bit faster, things that were a little bit quicker. You didn't really give Clemson a whole lot of time to just sit there and methodically pick apart everything. You were very quick with stuff. And part of that was because of the defensive line prowess that Clemson has. But, again, you're facing another team with some defensive line prowess. Why not try to implement some of that stuff again? At this point, you haven't proven you can stretch the field with your deep threats. You just haven't. At this point, you haven't even really proved that you can throw the ball consistently most of the time. At least with any, downfield shots or whatever, even mid-range throws have not really been there. So maybe you develop an offense that's just quick and short game stuff just to kind of attack you by like 1,000 paper cuts or something like that. But I think if they can go a little bit faster and keep South Carolina out of getting into, what they're comfortable with, which is obvious passing situations and obvious like set up pass plays, when you're just going fast and you don't know, okay, are they going to hand the ball off? Are they going to do a screen pass? Are they going to, do a little flip thing or whatever? The more you can keep them guessing, I think the more opportunities you're going to have to be successful offensively on Saturday night. So offensively, again, this is kind of the last chance you have to really prove that you can fix some stuff. Because if you can't come out of this bye week and put up some points, it's going to be very bad for you the rest of the year. Because I think this is also one of the last games you can truly just play some more defensive minded ball. I think this is, so offensively, you've got to get back in this one. But we will move on to the defense now because there's not as many things for me to talk about with them. But the first thing I do have is Harold Perkins. And man, Harold Perkins in this game needs to do what we've all said he's needed to do anytime we have faced an offense that is very, very focused on a very mobile quarterback like LaNorris Sellers is. And that is, hey, Harold Perkins, see ball, go get ball. That's what he needs to do. He needs to be a heat seeking missile every time LaNorris Sellers has the ball in his hands and go right after him. Now, I will say this. I think LaNorris Sellers is very good. He's very mobile. His mobility, though, is more powered by his strength, where he can kind of bowl over you and kind of keep going, stay up on his feet. Very good like that. He's not like a Jalen Milroe top end speed kind of guy. Now, he can burn you for sure, but like last year, it was after he kind of bowled over some defenders that he got like that 75-yard touchdown run or whatever it was against us in this matchup a year ago. Wasn't necessarily his speed, but more so we didn't have anybody left because he bowled over everybody. So LaNorris Sellers is definitely one of those guys that I think, yes, maybe Whit Weeks can be another spy option for you, but this has just got to be a Harold Perkins spy game where he just, again, every time Sellers has the ball in his hands, go get him. Go get him right now. Bring him down to the ground. If you can do that, I think you're going to have a great chance of success defensively Saturday night. Allow Witt to play free. Allow West to kind of play free. I don't really want those guys to be the spies. Although again, can they? Because maybe LaNorris is not the fastest of the mobile quarterbacks you're going to have to face. Possibly. But I don't want them to take that role. I want that to be Harold Perkins' role because we know he can do that very, very well. Now, along with that, with this offense, you are going to have to be very disciplined. You are going to have to be very keyed in on what LaNorris Sellers is doing. Now, this is not an offense that features as much eye candy as like an Ole Miss offense or like a Vanderbilt offense does. But again, when you're facing a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers who can run a read option or an RPO very well, you've got to make sure your eyes are disciplined on, what you're following, what your read is, and you cannot lose track of what your assignment is, even if you are trying to make sure Sellers is not going to beat you himself. Because here's the thing, against Ole Miss, what happened a lot was they were so focused on Trinidad Chambliss that a lot of times those tight ends were getting right behind the linebackers and he was hitting them for 10, 12-yard pickups. Wasn't anything too crazy, but it kept the chains moving or it got them back into reasonable distances. And that's the thing. The linebackers were so focused on trying to contain Trinidad that they forgot to keep up with their assignments as well. And so when he would pull it back and throw it, well, then there wasn't anybody there to defend the ball. So that's the thing. Yes, LaNorris Sellers is a threat, and you want to try to contain him as much as possible. But I think if you just give that to one guy and just say, hey, if you notice him take off, go to the ball, but keep your assignment. Make sure you are assignment sound the whole time because once you start letting him make plays all over with his creativity, then you're in for a world of hurt. Again, this offense is not as complicated or complex as an Ole Miss or a Vanderbilt or whatever, but you still have to be disciplined in every facet. So, again, play disciplined ball. Don't let people make plays behind you. Like, put the pressure on LaNorris Sellers to, have to go out there and make the plays, basically. And then again, with this offense, while it's not super complicated, last year you had some very big explosive plays that pretty much killed you. When you think about last year's game against South Carolina, yes, LaNorris Sellers got hurt, and that did cost them a good bit in the second half, especially. But what was the real backbreakers? LaNorris Sellers had a long touchdown run. Rocket Sanders had a long touchdown run. Like big plays that you gave up defensively, big explosive plays, was what did you in pretty much. You didn't do a terrible job defensively for most of the time, but you gave up some of those big plays, and that really allowed them to get some momentum. So this year, you need to cut those explosive plays out. Now, the good thing is you did cut a lot of those explosive plays out against Ole Miss. They didn't have nearly as many explosive plays as like maybe they did the year before. But again, this is a different type of offense. I expect Ole Miss to eventually connect on some of their explosive plays like they did against us a few weeks back because that's just how Ole Miss is offensively with Lane Kiffin. But with this offense, I mean, if you're telling me the longest plays of your runs, I think this defense can take those out. You're banking on an explosive potential play to come from your run game. This defense has been great against the run. I mean, I think that is something that can really play to your strength in this one is the fact that you have the type of defense that won't just give up those 80-yard touchdown runs anymore. At least they're not as susceptible to them as they were a year ago. So if you can cut those out, you're going to have a much better shot of keeping yourself within this game. Because again, those were the bigger backbreakers last year. It wasn't a lot of methodical drives or drives that went for like 10, 12 plays and ended with a touchdown or whatever. It was those drives where you gave up those big touchdowns that really swung a lot of momentum their way. So you've got to cut down on those. And then the last thing defensively is, man, this is an offense that has not been playing very good. Now, part of that has been because, Lenora Sellers did get hurt against Vanderbilt. He's been a little bit injured even since then. Like, they haven't necessarily been at full firepower, it seems like, the last couple of weeks. But again, this is an offense we've still seen as of right before the bye week a couple weeks ago put up 35 points. Like, this is a capable offensive scoring. It's just, will they come in on Saturday night and score a lot? I don't know. They've struggled to move the ball all year long. Their offensive rankings are very, very bad. And so for this LSU defense, this is really going to be a game where you can flex your defensive muscles big time. They struggle to run the ball. South Carolina does. LSU's got a very stingy run defense. You can pretty much have an opportunity to bottle them up all night long rushing the ball. You need to flex that muscle. You also, I don't know if they have as many explosive weapons on the outside as much as, definitely Ole Miss did or whatever. But again, if you can kind of make it, difficult for Lenora Sellers to find whatever few targets he may have out there, then I really do believe that LSU defensively can put themselves in the type of position where you could, as long as your offense just even plays somewhat up to the standard that we've seen before, you've got a great opportunity to go out there and just win this one on the back of your defense for sure. But again, that's not the type of game that I want to see, but this is probably one of the last few teams that you can do that. Yeah, I'm looking at the chart right now for South Carolina, and like Nick Harbor, who was supposed to be one of their big weapons for the year, he's got 11 catches for 220 and a touchdown. Jacobs is their leading receiver with 18 catches for 323 yards. And then there's nobody else with more than 8 catches, and none of them have eclipsed 100 yards on the season. As compared, let's look at LSU. LSU has Aaron Anderson that's got 23 for 305. So, I mean, both of these offenses are kind of struggling. I mean, but LSU has got 4 receivers that are already over 100 yards receiving. You've got Kyle Parker not too far behind at 91 yards on the season, and Nick Anderson has 72. So definitely you've had some better receiving numbers than South Carolina. But again, all that goes back to is this. The South Carolina offense doesn't have as many explosive playmakers on the outside, which I think plays very well in LSU's favor because you can put Mansour Delane on an island with Nick Harbor. I think at this point you pretty much know PJ Woodland and DJ Pickett are also very reliable and very, very good in coverage at this point. They can go out there and make some big plays too in the secondary. And AJ Halsey is a monster in that safety position. So I think defensively, you can really flex your muscles in this one. Bow up and absolutely stop even an offense that features Lenora Sellers. Now, I'm not banking on them doing that the whole entire game. Like Lenora Sellers will make a play or two happen just because he's that good of a quarterback. But at the end of the day, I think this LSU defense is going to be able to keep South Carolina off the board enough to help LSU get to the finish line in this one. Now, the line for this one has shifted. I think when it opened up, LSU was like a 10-point favorite, shrunk down to a 9-point favorite at one point, and then now it's an 8.5-point favorite for LSU. And so, if LSU can do all these things that I say, they can get back on track offensively. And basically, what I mean by that is Nuss looks more like himself, maybe not throwing for 300 yards, but throwing for, I don't know, 250. Is that too much to ask for a guy that threw for 197 against Ole Miss to just get back up to like 250? And then again, you put up rushing into the 100s somewhere on top of a really good defensive day. If they can do all that, I have LSU winning, and I have them winning by 24-16. Now, here's the thing. I would love for that number for LSU to go up into the 30s. It's just until I can see you do that, I can't be comfortable giving you that score. But I will give you a 24-16 win in Death Valley over South Carolina on Saturday night. And again, they just absolutely rout South Carolina. I'm not saying that South Carolina is some kind of indicator that you're going to run the table and go to the college football playoff. But if you can show up on Saturday, put up a really good offensive effort, top of another really good defensive performance, I think you're back on the right track. So that's obviously a huge game that we're going to be watching on Saturday. But there's also a lot of other games in week 7 that I'm interested in keeping my eyes on. And I want to share my predictions for those games with you all. So week 7 does feature some pretty interesting matchups. Maybe not like the biggest matchups we've had across a college football weekend over the last few weeks, but it's still some very, very interesting ones. And the first one up that I want to talk about is Alabama and Missouri. Now, this is a game for Alabama that maybe not necessarily like because of Missouri you need to be worried about, but just because of the circumstances. So, Alabama is heading on the road to play Missouri, and it's an 11 a.m. kickoff. 11 a.m. kickoffs can be very, very brutal, especially for the away team. And especially like, Alabama, who a lot of times is playing more so in that 2:30 time slot or playing a night game. They're not very often in the 11 a.m. time slot. Now, they have played an 11 a.m. game this year against Wisconsin. So, similar, but they were at home for that one. This is one where Bama's going to have to go on the road against a Missouri team that is playing decently well so far this season, I would say. And, they have moved themselves up to number 14 in the country. So obviously they aren't too bad 5-0, but let's look at their schedule. So, Central Arkansas, well, Kansas, 42-31. Good game there. Kansas is not the worst team, I guess, in college football anymore, but still. Then you beat Louisiana like a drum, beat South Carolina, but then you beat UMass. So, yes, Missouri is 5-0 and 14th in the country, but can I really believe that they are as good as they seem to be? There's a lot of people very high on their quarterback who has thrown for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns on the year. Rushing wise, they've been pretty good on the ground, pretty good rushing offense. Got some pretty good receivers, it looks like. But again, is that because of the competition you've been playing rather than actually being a really good football team? That's the thing. I don't know if Missouri is coming into this one as like some kind of big time threat to Alabama, more so than just the situation of the day, being on the road, being at Missouri. And let's be honest, Missouri's a smaller stadium. It's not, I think sometimes these guys get so used to playing in these 100+ thousand Coliseum atmospheres that it can be a little bit offsetting when you're going on the road to an environment in a much smaller stadium. So, circumstances wise, I can see why a lot of people think Bama might be in trouble. I've heard several people think that Alabama is going to lose to Missouri. this weekend. Vegas only has Bama as a 3-point favorite in this game. And look, sometimes Vegas just for some reason knows something. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, my gut is just telling me that this is not a game that Alabama is going to drop. I don't think they're going to drop it. I've got them winning this one. Alabama takes it over Missouri for that 11 a.m. game. Now we move into a Big Ten matchup with Ohio State and Illinois. Now, Illinois is a team that has been playing pretty well this year. I believe they are 15th or they're 17th right now in the country, sorry, at 5-1. Ohio State still firmly at number 1 at 5-0. And I would love to say that Illinois has a shot in this one, but I just think talent-wise they are outclassed, and Vegas kind of reflects that. Vegas has Ohio State as a 14.5-point favorite, even on the road at Illinois. As much as I would love for Illinois to kind of push Ohio State a little bit and kind of prove that, that they can hang around with them and potentially even upset them, I just don't see it happening. So I've got Ohio State winning that matchup with Illinois. Then we get to probably one of the few games of the day that a lot of people are slotting as like a big time game, and that is Indiana versus Oregon. Now, Indiana is ranked number 7, and Oregon is ranked number 3. And of course, all eyes are on Indiana right now, thinking that they can go out there and do something crazy. And look, talk about Illinois. Illinois was undefeated going into their matchup with Indiana, and Indiana laid the smackdown on them 63-10. So Indiana, did show up against that team when Illinois was in the top 10 and beat them. But then you played Iowa the next week and only won 20-15, then had a bye week, and now you're coming into this game against Oregon, where Oregon's also coming off a bye, and they have been playing very, very well themselves. You talk about explosiveness. Dante Moore has 14 passing touchdowns on the year, to only 1 interception. Rushing wise, they've been pretty good, but I mean, obviously Dante Moore has just been slinging the ball around the yard, and it's been just incredible. I've said all year long, I don't think there's really a true elite team in college football this year. I think there's a lot of very good teams. I think there's a lot of teams that can, compete this year for a college football playoff spot and be in the hunt for the national championship. I'm not saying there's no good teams in college football. There's a lot of really good teams in college football. There's just no elite team, but I think Oregon is maybe the closest to it, balance-wise. And so I cannot see Oregon dropping this one. And again, I think Indiana is not really that impressive of a team. I just think their schedule has kind of worked out in their favor along the way. So I think Oregon's going to take this one. Oregon's a 7-point fave. I might even like them a little bit more than 7 points. But all that being said, got Oregon taking that one. And then we move to the Red River rivalry, which does kind of take a weird backseat this year because Texas is coming off of an embarrassing loss to Florida. And look, Oklahoma is in a weird position right now because John Mateer, it looks like the signs are that he's going to try to give it a go on Saturday, coming off of his hand, procedure that he had done. But honestly, is he going to be 100%? Is he going to be good to go? I don't know. Does Arch Manning, take all the criticism that he's been having the last couple weeks, or the whole last week, basically, since the loss to Florida, it's piled on even more. But really, all season, a lot of people have been judging him pretty harshly. Does that kind of finally wake something up in him, knowing that loss on Florida, or that loss against Florida, was kind of on him in a lot of ways for throwing really bad picks, taking a bad sack? Does that kind of wake something up in this game, get him going? Maybe Texas finally kind of puts it together, wakes up after a loss, and improves themselves. I don't know. Here's the thing. Texas has already lost twice. They lost to Ohio State, who's the number 1 team in the country. And then they lost to a Florida team that, has got a really good defense, but offensively, they have not really been great all year long, and they were able to put the smack down on you a little bit. I know the final score doesn't reflect that, but They kind of did. And so it's so interesting because Texas is a 1.5 point favorite, which is just crazy to me. But I get if Mateer's not 100%, maybe you get a chance to kind of hang around in this matchup. But at the end of the day, look, I think Oklahoma's defense is very, very solid. Venables, I think, will have a good plan against Arch Manning. And yes, while if Mateer is not 100%, they may not be at full firepower offensively. I just don't trust Arch enough right now to lead Texas in this game. I just don't. And so I'm going to pick Oklahoma. I'm going against the favorite here in Texas, and I'm going with Oklahoma because I just think Texas right now is in a really bad position that we haven't seen them in too often the last couple of years. So I'm going with Oklahoma in this one. Give me the Sooners. And then Georgia versus Auburn. This is a rivalry that obviously, oh boy, it is always intense. It is always a lot of fun to watch. And of course, this year it is at Auburn, which is always a tough place to play at Jordan-Hare, especially at night, which it's going to be at 6:30. Georgia is a 3.5 point favorite right now. And as much as I would love to say that, the Jordan-Hare voodoo magic that they've got going on in that place or whatever could stop Georgia from winning this one, I think the problem more so exists with Jackson Arnold. I do not believe in Jackson Arnold. I've kind of been out on him pretty much all year. I just don't think he's that good of a quarterback. I never really got the hype around him. Yeah, he can run really well, but he just doesn't have a lot other than that, in my opinion, to offer. I think Georgia will come into this one still looking to kind of prove themselves, especially after that Bama loss. They're going to be, I think, still lit up about that and going out there and trying to rebound from that. And so Gunnar Stockton has taken a lot of steps forward. I like how Gunnar Stockton's been playing. I think this Georgia team as a whole is playing pretty well all year long, even in that loss to Alabama. They put up a great defensive effort in the second half, clawed their way back into it. I just don't trust Auburn that much. So give me Georgia on the road at Auburn. I think that is going to be a game that Georgia can win, and it might be tight because of Jordan-Hare and all that kind of stuff, but I think Georgia is just going to outpower them a little bit. So give me Georgia in that one. Now, before we wrap up here, I want to start doing something kind of different and also give you a game that maybe isn't going to be on a lot of people's like must watch games on Saturday, but a game that I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. And my interesting game of the week is Florida and Texas A&M. Because here's the thing, I've also not been very high on Texas A&M this year, mostly because of Marcel Reed. Florida's defense has been very, very tough. Now I don't know what they're doing in Florida, but like there's so many guys out right now. Somebody made a joke of like Florida hosting some kind of night or fight club right now for something because like a lot of their defense is out. And so it could give the advantage to Texas A&M. Well, I say a lot of their defense. Several defensive linemen are injured for this game. But I am hoping that they will still have enough defensive firepower to kind of still show up and prove that they're a pretty solid defense in the country on Saturday. And again, just like, we weren't really sure about Arch and company, and Arch lost to Florida last week. I'm wondering if Florida can, have lightning strike twice for them, and can they beat A&M? Now it's a much tougher task, than Texas because I believe this one's at A&M if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check that, but you know, listen, if Florida did it once, they could do it again. And again, I don't think Marcel Reed is like that great of a quarterback. And I want to see if this can actually prove, you know, whether or not A&M is legit. It is at A&M and it is a 6 o'clock game, so it will be, you know, it will be a little bit tight. But A&M is a 7.5 point favorite, which is a little high for me. But again, if most of Florida's defense is out for sure, then maybe it does get a little bit easier for an A&M. But I think that's an interesting one to keep your eye on, especially for LSU fans, because again, you've got A&M coming into town in just a couple of weeks. And honestly, I don't know if A&M's faced too many defenses that I would consider to be like super legitimate. So, can they go up against this Florida defense and put up points or whatever? I think that's a huge test for them, and it's going to be a good indicator on how I think they might do against LSU in a couple weeks when it comes time for that game. So, all that being said, Florida Texas A&M is a game that I am keeping a very very close eye on Saturday. It's just not one of the top games in at least my opinion of the weekend. But that's going to do it for this one. Hey, thank you guys so much for following along. If you would, make sure to please like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe on there as well. We'd love to just have you come hang out with us all the time as we talk LSU sports, talk about other things going on in the college sports world. It's a lot of fun. But thank you guys so much for listening. I've had a blast talking about it. Have a wonderful weekend of college football. And as always, let's go Tigers.